We have another school that's 98% Latino or Hispanic. So the ways in which they looked at inequality or looked at social justice issues were for language minority students, students who didn't speak English as a first language. So every school defines social justice slightly different. There were three major areas that were addressed in regards to social justice in the study. Curriculum, providing access to what we call advanced placement classes and honors classes. So these are the classes where students oftentimes are selected based on their prior academic record as well as their academic ability, right? But what we find in our context oftentimes is when there are schools that are multiracial, these classes become racially identifiable. So that we find the majority of these classes to have white and Asian students in the advanced placement courses and the honors courses, and the African American and Latino students in what we call remedial classes. So social justice on these campuses where there are multi-racial groups isn't about increasing access to honors classes and AP classes so that more kids would have access to those classes, right? As an example, we look at school organization, and it's about creating smaller learning environments in ways in which students can be connected in meaningful relationships with each other as well as with adults. There's a lot of literature that talks about what we call the sense of belonging. When kids feel a sense of a belonging or attachment to the institution, they tend to do better academically. And so looking at the factors that create this sense of belonging or this attachment, oftentimes it's an attachment to an adult on that campus who cares about them, who notices when they're not on campus, who follows up with them, right? So as we think about creating these smaller learning environments, it really is about creating relationships on the campus so that students can connect and feel connected to the institution, right? Thirdly, we see social justice playing itself out in terms of personnel, committed to hiring qualified teachers and holding them accountable for providing high quality instruction. Qualified teachers, you'll see that in quotations. We had what we call No Child Left Behind. It's a federal legislation that began to mandate qualifications for teachers. And they equate quality teachers with certification. So prior to No Child Left Behind, you might find in a number of large urban schools a disproportionate number of teachers who were not credentialed or licensed in their field. And so a social justice issue was making sure that teachers taught in a field in which they had been prepared to teach, right? So making sure that that would occur. Also making sure that to the degree that it was possible, that the teaching staff reflected the life experience of the students in the school, right? So to the degree possible, making sure there were some cultural connections. Because we also know that when people who share kind of cultural and lived experiences, they have perhaps an insight to the kind of challenges students bring to the classroom. So when teaching staff has the diversity that reflects the diversity of the school, we tend to argue that it does better for the academic achievement of the students. And then we go on to the students. While the students recognize the inequalities on the campus, they didn't identify them as social justice issues. And I think this has a lot to do with what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. That over time, kids they've been socialized to think either they're not smart enough to be in the honors classes, or certain kinds of kids ought not be placed in the honors classes, and they shouldn't achieve, right? So kids didn't necessarily see it as a social justice issue. They begin to internalize what was happening for them on the campus. And then finally, I'm going to skip this one here, but there was there was some recognition on the part of the school leaders that what was taking place in the school was part of this broader and larger issues of social justice. But again, many of our school leaders didn't define their work in that way. Again, because there was no clear definition. But what we did know is that they were very active in their communities and active in the transformation of the communities in which they work. So while they didn't call it social justice, there was this element of community activism, right? And I'm going to just conclude here with some of the effective strategies that we found that work in terms of creating the conditions for increased student achievement. And again, if I take you back to that initial framework, so these strategies are within that framework. So kind of the structural dimension, the policies, the structures, create small schools, small learning environments. Another thing that we found to be effective, or at least reported in the data, curriculum reform. Again, opportunities for explicit conversations about race and structural inequalities. And this goes to this idea of multicultural education, intercultural education. How do you get kids to recognize the inequalities in the schooling system and then empower them to do something about it? And then to design cross-cultural cooperative learning opportunities. How do you get kids to work cooperatively across racial, ethnic, and issues of diversity? And then to avoid rigorous or rigid academic tracking systems. So in our context, we place kids in courses based on their perceived ability. And so we want to stay away from what we call tracking and doing that. Then under this normative dimension, increase professional development opportunities for educators around anti-racist education, cross-cultural and multicultural education. Secondly, to better educate families about the inequalities in the educational system. Again, schools are just a microcosm of the communities in which they are embedded. So we have to figure out ways to be in partnership with the families of these schools and educate them and train them about the schooling process and the schooling system. And then finally, increase voice of multiple stakeholders. So creating partnerships with all the people who have an invested interest in the educational system and begin to figure out the ways in which we can leverage the different resources that are available to be used in schools. Oftentimes these schools are embedded in impoverished communities and they don't have resources. But if we can connect them with businesses or connect them with foundations or organizations that do have resources that can be used, we think that would be very helpful. And then finally, create systems for authentic participation in the schooling process. So it's not just invite parents to the school, but really give them meaningful work and things that will begin to transform the educational system as well as their community. So I'm going to stop there and ask if you have questions about the study, about the work, or anything about where I live, how many kids I have, anything you want. Yes?
How small is American Standard for a small school? How many grades?
Well, I think the goal is about 500 students. Yes. So when we say small school, the maximum is about 500, but it's anywhere from 300 to 500. That's ideal.
Okay, and how many students in a classroom?
You mean ideal or reality?
Ideal.
Ideal, we had a ratio of 20 to 1 in elementary school, and I think about 35 to 1 in secondary school. Those are ideal. But reality could be anywhere from 45 to 50 students in a class, depending on where you are, right? Certainly at the high school level.
To have not more than 30 students in a
But
class.
in reality, we have the situation that, you know, there are like 40, 42, 45 kids.
Absolutely.
In elementary school.